Welcome to another edition of TSA Safety Matters. I'm your host, Greg Kerr from Stakeholder Relations, and today we're with Dara Vorkapic, TSA's Director of Upholstered and Stuffed Articles, for a few thoughts on what's happening in the industry and trends that are occurring. So thanks for being with us today, Dara.
You're welcome.
Now, Dara, I know that one of the exciting things that you're working on right now have to do with incident reporting and something you're calling the 3 Rs, which is resale, reuse, and redistribute. Mm-hmm. What are the issues that you've sort of uncovered there, and how are you tackling them?
Okay, so the 3R project, what we're finding is there's a lot of used mattresses and furniture and other articles that are being sold without a second-hand label. So there's a designated inspector that would go out and interact with hotels, wholesalers, retailers, and auctioneers to find out where they're getting the merchandise from. What we have found was that there's a lot of used items, like mattresses, that are contaminated and they're being resold. So what we've done is we've issued orders and for destruction. The incident reporting sort of follows suit, where currently in our process we have a complaint SR, and it doesn't determine whether it's a health impact or whether it's just a competitiveness. So what I'm working with PSRM group is to determine if it's a health issue, then it should be an incident report.
That the PSR, that's our Public Safety Risk Management Group?
That's correct, yes. So I've been working closely with Shrikant, Valenci, and Tom Ayers in developing a guideline due to the fact that the current regulation for upholstered and stuffed articles, we don't have that process in place. So with a director's order, it's a guideline for the inspector to conduct the inspection and do a report analysis to determine how severe the issue is.
Mm-hmm. Now, you get those anonymous calls
Yes.
as well as the competitor that phones in saying, you know, someone is involved in unfair practice. And
Right.
Now, what happens when you get those anonymous calls? Those tend to be more of the health risk issues rather than the sort of business side of things?
It could. It actually could work both ways. We've received anonymous calls where it's, someone might say, well, I'm labeling these articles, but the person at the other side of me is not. So that would be more of a competitor complaint, and we would just do a complaint, and whether it's justifiable or not, where we could also get anonymous complaints where we've received saying, well, there's a store that's selling used furniture, used mattresses, and they're contaminated. So I would send the inspector to go out, conduct the inspection, and that would be an incident report would be completed. So we do get quite a number of complaints where it's just an anonymous caller.
Mm-hmm. Now, you also make a decision on whether you have 2 inspectors go out. How do you make that distinction based on these sort of tips that come out? Okay.
So, for instance, I'll use one example. So we did get an anonymous complaint at a furniture store in Peterborough that had witnessed that there's used mattresses being sold as new. So when the inspector called me and said, well, I got this complaint, I made the decision that it was best for 2 inspectors to go out because it was a larger store. From that, we found out that there were warehouses in certain parts of Ontario that required 2 inspectors. Otherwise, we'd be inundated just looking at mattresses for seizing them for destruction.
Mm-hmm. Now, you're going out and talking to a variety of players, hotels, wholesalers, auctioneers, and what they're doing is they're reselling their old mattresses or old furniture. And what sort of message you want to make clear to those players?
So the 3R project, actually Nancy Frost is the designated inspector for that. So what Nancy does is she goes to these head office companies, for instance, like if she goes to a hotel, and she would talk to the individual and ask them, where are you sending or selling your mattresses? Where are they going? Because there's a term that they have a three-year term, 4-year term, and they start changing or replacing their mattresses and furniture. So it's not just mattresses that we're looking at, it's anything that is upholstered and stuffed articles. So you'll have furniture, the pillows, duvets, and so on. So we get that information, we go to usually it's at an auctioneer or a warehouse where they sell it, and we issue orders for destruction.
Mm-hmm.
So that's basically what we're looking at. So the message that we want to send out there is that if there's anything that is a returned article and is, well, actually an upholstered stuffed article, and it's back for resale, 2 things. It's either you affix a secondhand label, or it's contaminated and it's ordered for destruction.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the message we'd like to get out.
Now, you do have good players that abide by
Mm-hmm.
the regulations.
Yes, we do.
Who actually make sure that they've got all those separate sections when they've got something that's returned,
Mm-hmm.
that's in good condition, medium condition, and
Right.
and contaminated.
Right.
Now, you also conversely have bad players.
Mm-hmm.
How do you determine trends and issues that crop up, and what do you do about it? Like, for example, with a lot of international
Mm-hmm.
players, we've seen Canada's or even Ontario's own domestic production go down and
Right.
international go up.
Mm-hmm.
What do you do when you encounter those issues?
Yeah. So we do have some very good players, and we also have some bad players. One of the issues is that there's been a huge trend in domestic manufacturing versus imports. So I've been here a very long time, so I've seen that trend. So the thing that's happening out there in the market is we can't compete here. Domestic manufacturers cannot compete with imports. And the imports, what we're finding is that they're trying to use materials that are used, and it's a cheaper way instead of buying new materials. So there's certain or various countries that have no regulation in using used materials in upholstery and stuffed articles. So when we see, country of origin, it kind of flags it, and the inspector will make that discretion to say, yes, I need to sample this right now. And then we would just order for destruction, because that's part of our mandate is no secondhand material.
And they also try to wiggle in other ways. If they can't come directly in Ontario, then they'll try
Yes.
a back route through the United States, or who again might not even be aware of Ontario's regulations. Is
Right.
that correct?
Yes, it is. And that's another good example, actually, is with the infestation of bed bugs. So what's happening is that there's a lot of players in the States that there is no regulation in refurbishing mattresses or upholstered furniture. And by that, I mean, so if someone returns a mattress, they just put in a new ticking over it. We don't allow that here. Absolutely not.
What's a ticking?
A ticking is the fabric, the shell.
Oh, okay.
And they call it, in their trade term, it's called the ticking. So it's just the fabric of the mattress.
Mhm.
So we've had some instances where we've had bad players where they've tried to do that here in Ontario, and I have revoked their registration. So we're busy.
Mm.
We're keeping busy with that, yes.
So, and I guess the word sort of gets out.
Oh, absolutely.
It's not necessarily a small group, but
Mhm.
I'm sure that you at least send a strong message that. this will not be allowed.
Yeah, we do, and you know, with industry, it's like anything else where it does get around. I mean, there have been some places where they say, well, I'll talk to a customer, and they'll say, oh yes, we've come across your TSSA inspector, and we know the law, and we don't want to, you know, do any bad things. We just want to make sure that we're doing our due diligence, and we do have a lot of international customers that are not aware of the regulation. So part of it is education, and there's always new trends coming in. I mean, we've seen a lot of materials out there that's being added on, and it's due to cost. So a lot of man-made materials are being made, as well as natural fibers.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of people that I've noticed that prefer the natural, like coconut fibers, and hemp is another one, which is quite popular, latex foam.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's all part of researching and knowing the generic terminology. So I do a lot of research for materials because they have a generic, well, we require a generic name, but there's a lot of trade names out there as well.
Mm-hmm. So you have to keep on top of a lot of sort of trends in the manufacturing
Yes.
industry to really understand what's in the something that they're supposed to be declaring.
Oh, absolutely. So if there's a new material, then I train the staff as required. And so I have a sample book for each one. And it actually works out pretty good because the sample is there of the filling material, and it discloses what the components are and determine the generic name.
Now, when you have two different types of inspections that you conduct, one is a periodic and one is an ad hoc inspection, what are the differences between the two?
The ad hoc is first time, and the periodic is inspections that have been previously inspected. But with ad hoc, I mean, is mostly our work, and we also do a lot of seasonal.
Mm-hmm.
So for instance, if we do a large retailer, we could be in there 5-6 times a year. We would start from back to school inspections, and then we would go back for Halloween products such as costumes and ornaments, and then we would go back again for winter apparel and Christmas ornaments, and then we would go back for Valentine's and Easter and patio furniture, and the cycle all over again. So those are for major retailers, and those will always be ad hocs because they're different locations reassigned to different inspectors.
Mm-hmm. So that makes sense too, that you can allocate your resources most sensibly.
Yes.
Do bedding and furniture and sporting goods
Right.
and everything else.
Mm-hmm.
But for the ad hocs, then do those as they crop up.
That's right.
On a seasonal basis.
Right.
Excellent. Thanks, Dara, for your insight. We'll look forward to more material and getting the word out on USA. In fact, we will have inspectors giving presentations.
Mm-hmm.
One upcoming on the 3R program, the reuse, resale, and redistribute.
Yes. Thank you, Greg, for having me. It's a pleasure.
Excellent. Stay tuned for more TSA Safety Matters.